Good afternoon from the state capitol in Jefferson City. I'm Gary McEllier with the Missouri State Auditor's Office, and welcome to the State Auditor's Report on Northwest Missouri State University. This report was made available earlier today on our website at auditor.mo.gov, and that report number is 2011-47. The presentation is also being streamed live today on our website at auditor.mo.gov, and a recording will be posted as well on our website on our YouTube channel in the coming days. We also have members today joining us from the media via conference call, and we would ask you, members of the media, to mute your cell phones as well if you are joining us via conference call. Auditor Schweich will be taking your questions following this presentation. And now I'll turn the webcast over to Missouri State Auditor Tom Schweich.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to deliver today the audit of the Northwest Missouri State University. This will take about 15 to 20 minutes. I'll give a presentation on a summary of our findings. As Gary said, you can read the whole audit on our website. And then I'll take your questions. So without any further delay, I first wanted to introduce Gail Garrison from our audit staff, who's here with me today, who was a laboring oar in this audit, and she did great work, and we're pleased to have her. And any questions I can't answer, I'm sure Gail will be able to answer. I wanted to talk, first of all, about the background and scope of this audit. The Missouri State Auditor regularly audits universities pursuant to our authority under Missouri statutes. It's an institution that's supported in whole or in part by state funds, and therefore we do an audit on a regular basis. In this particular case, we audited the fiscal years ending June 30th, 2008, 2009, and 2010. If some pertinent issues arose after that date, we note them also in the report, but it's basically confined to those 3 fiscal years. Issues that are completed before that time, so from 2007 or earlier, are generally not within the scope of this audit unless they relate directly to something we found later on. We expended over 3,000 hours on this audit, so it's one of our larger audits. And it doesn't even include the management or administrative hours that people like me would spend reviewing and editing the audit. So it was a very thorough and complete audit covering a long period of time, and we hope you'll be pleased with the results. First thing I wanted to say is we discovered a number of issues. I'll be discussing them in some detail today. We did not find any evidence of fraud or theft, and that's really the first thing we look for, whether there was criminal activity, and there was certainly nothing that we saw of that type. Now, we don't audit everything. We can't audit everyone at the university, but basically our findings are confined to ensuring that there are good, sound, and legal fiscal and accounting practices. The audit is intended to be constructive, not punitive. We really look to provide guidance to improve governance, and our objective is to provide ideas by which the university can improve its performance, be more efficient with its resources, and therefore give a better and higher quality education to all the students there. Obviously, there's a lot to say about Northwest Missouri State. It's a first-rate institution in every respect, from its academic performance to its new nursing program, of course, to its women's basketball team. We're all very proud to have this university in Missouri. And again, my comments will be designed to help improve the performance of that. We instituted a rating system in the auditor's office after I started, where entities get an excellent, good, a fair, or a poor. And the main reason we did that was so people have a snapshot of how well the institution is performing, and that it can't be manipulated or altered by people who are either in favor or against the auditor or whatever. We try to give a rating based on a very objective set of standards. In this case, we rated the university fair. That means that the entity does need to improve operations in several areas. There were certain findings. A finding is usually an adverse event that require management's immediate attention, and we did find some of those here. But we've seen a lot worse, I can tell you, and everything we found seems to be something that could be fairly easily remedied, and that's some good news. Our principal finding, our principal issue that we had when we audited related to what are referred to as auxiliary services contracts. Auxiliary services contracts are contracts, for example, food services that you have at the university, facilities management, beverage, vending, the campus bookstore, all the vendors that you have there, the people that come in and they provide important services to the students from food to books. We found some significant problems with the way the contracts were let in that case. So, for example, in the case of competitive bidding, which is a really important thing. I mean, you want to get the best value for the services that you have. We found some significant problems here. Under the delegation of authority that the university received from the state's Office of Administration, which normally conducts procurements. Within universities, they often delegate that authority over to the university as long as they follow certain rules. And the rules that were in place for Northwest Missouri State were that if they're going to solicit a bid for a product or a service that's over $3,000, they have to have multiple bidders, or they have to have a competitive bidding process. And if it's over $25,000, they actually need to advertise that. And that's a pretty standard policy and procedure. In this particular case, we found that Northwest Missouri State University had not competed any of its auxiliary services contracts, large contracts, for between 13 and 32 years. And one of the main reasons why there hadn't been competition was that as part of an award to one of these auxiliary services contractors, there was a requirement that they would make donations to the stadium fund of the university. And this creates some legal and ethical problems. In particular, for example, the facilities management contract for the university had not been competitively bid since 1997, so we're talking 14 years. And then there were amendments to that contract that required the vendor that was chosen many years ago in 1997 to lease the football stadium suite for 12 years at $10,000 per year and to make a $500,000 contribution to the stadium fund. And if the contract were terminated for any reason, then some of that money would have to be returned. In the case of the food services contract, that had not been competitively bid since 1997 also, and there was a $500,000 contribution to the stadium fund required as well. And again, if that contract were terminated, much of that money would have to be given back. Let's talk about the beverage vending contract. That was amended at one point to require $50,000 contributions for 6 consecutive years. And again, if that contract were terminated, some of that would have to be paid back. Similarly, the campus bookstore. In that case, that had not been competitively bid since 1978. I think that was the year I graduated high school, a long time ago. The contractor was required to contribute $15,000 for the stadium fund for 5 years, and then another $50,000 in 2007, contingent upon contract renewals through 2017. What does that mean? That meant the university locked itself into very important and very expensive contracts with a promise of contributions to stadium funds and other funds, and therefore probably didn't get the best value for its dollar. Certainly the costs of the contributions could be built into the actual contract, and therefore free and open competition, which is an important part of our state law, did not occur. And there is a pretty good argument to be made that the university did not get the best value for its dollar. This is important. It's Missouri law that these competitions occur, and they did not occur in any of these large contracts for many, many years. I want to talk also a little bit about a loan. In 2007, Northwest Missouri State obtained a $2 million interest-free loan from its food services vendor to be paid back in 5 annual payments, but the balance had to be repaid immediately if the contract were canceled. So that again prevented competitive bidding because they didn't want to pay back the loan immediately. There's no documentation that exists to show that the agreement was reviewed by legal counsel or approved by the Board of Regents, and that was also an issue that we found in reviewing these contracts. Another finding we had was relative to contract compliance. Even if the contracts are properly let out, competitively bid, which they were not in this case, it's important to monitor contract compliance to make sure they're actually fulfilling the terms of the contract. In this particular case, in the food services contract and the vending sales contractor, there was very summary data provided. It was not the usual level of detail that we would see to ensure accuracy. There's a facilities management joint review committee that's supposed to make sure the facilities management contracts are being accurately and adequately performed. That has not even met in 3 years. And there was a facilities management services contractor that was supposed to provide an annual report, and we could not find an annual report except all the way back in 2006. So in addition to the issue we had with the lack of competitive bidding due to the requirement for donations to the stadium fund and other things, we also found that there was not adequate supervision of these contracts to ensure proper performance. So our recommendations were simple. Solicit bids for auxiliary services contractors like books and food and things like that. Reevaluate the practice of entering into long-term contracts. And seriously consider discontinuing vendor donations contingent upon contract renewal because it prevents the university from getting the best value for its dollar. In this case, the board was very cooperative. They agreed that purchasing should be open and transparent, that competitive bidding should be required, and said they would solicit proposals within the next 24 to 36 months. We don't think you need to wait 24 to 36 months, but at least there's a recognition that proper procurement practices need to go into place. We want to ensure that if there are loans that occur, that those are reviewed by legal counsel and approved by the Board of Regents, which is a requirement. The board agreed with that recommendation. And we want to make sure that there's proper oversight and control of auxiliary contracts with, for example, annual reports being provided, review committees meeting, those types of things. And the board also agreed to implement those recommendations. So while the findings are fairly serious, because we think this involves getting the best value for the dollar, we did find that the board was cooperative, interested in improving the quality of its management, and we were pleased with their level and desire to improve what's going on at the university. So that was one very important issue relative to auxiliary services contracts, dealing with big vendors, people that provide major services to the university. Our second area of findings related to the former president's employment contract. In this case, President Hubbard, now I don't know President Hubbard, and I'm sure he did a fine job, and I've always been having been a former university professor myself, I really admire what university presidents have to go through, what presidents and chancellors have to go through. It's difficult. There's fundraising responsibilities, there's teaching responsibilities, maintaining academic integrity. We don't look into any of those issues when we audit. We don't evaluate the performance of the president. That's not our job. We just make sure that all rules and regulations relative to their compensation and their activities are in accordance with state law and sound accounting principles. In this case, the board allowed the retired president a transition year at full pay and 2 years of health and accident insurance for the president and his spouse. He also received a personal expense allowance of $12,500, which required no accounting, and a vehicle allowance of $21,600. During the time that this occurred, he was paid $224,762 during the transition period. This was after the new president was hired, and he received a health care benefit that was valued at $30,000. He also got $8,900 to relocate to Kansas City. And then the Northwest Foundation, which is subsidized by the university, also paid another $30,000 to the former president. It's a lot of money. I don't really second guess whether that was a worthwhile thing or how good his services were. But what we do know is under Article 3, Section 39 of the Missouri Constitution, compensation for past services is actually not allowed for people who receive funding from the state. So while we don't pass any judgment on the quality of his work, which I'm sure was fine, to be paid, if you really add it all up, you're talking about close to $300,000 that appeared to be for past services. That would be problematic under the Missouri Constitution. Now, he did have some services that he performed for the university, and had they been better documented and more clearly justifiable, we might not have had an adverse finding here. But there didn't appear to be adequate explanation or documentation of why he would receive such a large package after he left. And so we find that to be problematic. Also, while he was employed, he received $12,500 as a miscellaneous personal expense allowance to cover meals and travel. There was no requirement that he submit receipts. And in addition to that $12,500, there was another almost $3,000 in receipted meals and things that were sent in. So we're not quite sure why, if he had $12,500 in expense account, why there would need to be another $3,000 that he provided receipts for. Now we know that the current president is under a much more stringent set of rules and terms. So it looks like some of those concerns that we raised have already been addressed by the board, and hopefully that won't happen again. So our recommendations are pretty clear. To ensure future employment contracts with the university president comply with state law and the Constitution, and properly safeguard university interests, that there are receipts provided for allowances that are created for travel, car, meals, whatever. And the board said they agreed with this recommendation, and they will implement it. Again, I want to emphasize that I'm not at all critical of the performance of the president. What we do is come in and look at it and make sure laws and regulations have been abided by, and in this case, we don't think they were. Our third finding related to the Northwest Foundation. It's a 501(c), a not-for-profit corporation. It's intended to obtain financial donations that promote the goals of the university and its programs. It's managed by the board of directors and a vice president, and the university subsidizes a significant amount of the operating expenses, which is a problem under the Missouri Constitution. And we also found Northwest Foundation has no contract or written agreement with the university. When there's this much money going back and forth, we would think that would be a prudent financial and contractual thing to do. Let me talk a little bit more in detail about it. The university subsidizes over $3.3 million of foundation-related operating expenses in the 3 years that we audited, so it was averaging a little over $1 million a year. Over $2.5 million of that subsidy that the university is paying to the foundation go for salary and benefits of university employees who perform duties for the foundation. And that can be problematic, but what makes it definitely problematic here is that the time records that the university had don't track whether the work is being performed by for the university or for the foundation. So if you're going to have this arrangement, which has some issues to begin with, it certainly ought to involve a contract which lays out who's going to do what, and then there has to be proper accounting for how people spend their time. Section 38A and 39.1 of Article 3 of the Missouri Constitution very, very specifically prohibits granting or lending public funds to a private entity. And that appears to be what happened here with the money that went over to the foundation from the university. Our recommendation was to discontinue subsidizing the foundation or reduce the subsidies until they can be discontinued, and enter into a written agreement with the foundation, which I think the university plans to have within 90 days, which is good. Our fourth finding was relative to contract controls and procedures. In this case, it was just a matter of really solid, good accounting. We have some very, very thorough forensic auditors, and they found some mistakes that were made. Now, this happens all the time with large entities, and we expect it at a university, but I'll give you a couple of examples of things where costs really could have been avoided and money was wasted. For example, the university has auditing services, which is great. We're auditors. We always want to see competent and quality auditing services. The auditors that the university use, competent auditors, they send bills after they do their auditing. But in this particular case, sometimes when you get a bill, there's a previous balance. So the balance says, previous balance, say, $10,000, and new balance, $10,000. And if you've already paid the previous balance, you only pay $10,000 once. In this particular case, we found that the university had overpaid the auditing firm by over $23,000 because they had paid carry forward balances a second time. The bill came in, said balance forward. They had already previously paid the bill, and in this case they paid it again because they hadn't realized they'd previously paid the carry forward balance, and that's really $23,000 right out the window. They paid $3,900 in additional accounting and audit-related services, but there was no invoices or detail for what was performed for that additional $3,900. And we unfortunately found that the university does not regularly verify billing rates with contract terms. You really need to look at what you agreed to and make sure those billing rates are consistent with that. We're not alleging any misconduct on the part of the auditing firm, but sometimes mistakes occur, and it's important that somebody's monitoring to make sure that the university does not pay too much for those services. So again, we want better procedures in place to ensure review and payment of contracted billings, and so that there's no overpayments made like there were in the past. And the board was very receptive to that and plans to make those changes within the next year. Next finding we found was relative to room and board rates. Room and board rates were increased over the past 4 years, each year in fact. But we didn't see room and board rate reviews that we normally see in a university. It says it reviews room and board planned expenditures, but there was no documentation of such a review. So we don't really know if the rates were set properly. Now, it may have been entirely appropriate to increase the room rates, but again, as accountants and as lawyers, which is what our office basically is, we go in and see, is there documentation? Is it done properly? Is it done effectively? And in this case, we did not see it. They said, the response of the universities was, we do really carefully and systematically look at room and board rates, but they acknowledge that they need to keep more careful documentation so it's subject to audit, and we can make sure that there was a good quality process that went into those determinations, especially when it involves the funds of the students. Next, we had some concerns about 3 on-campus education programs for preschool through high school. The university has these programs, and many universities have programs like this, and it's a great idea to bring a broader base of the community into the university community. In this case, there are children's education programs. For example, there are 3 on-campus education programs for children. These are operating at very big losses, and the university is subsidizing them. So, for example, the Early Childhood Center serves approximately 43 children. They charge $63 to $348 per child per month, depending on means available. They have 2 full-time and part-time employees, but they've had over $100,000 of operating losses in each of the last 3 years, not even including overhead costs or tuition revenues from related degree programs. So you're talking about actual out-of-pocket losses of $100,000. That's a problem. There's the Horace Mann Laboratory School, kindergarten through 6th grade, serving approximately 114 students, 8 full-time and 8 part-time employees. used by Education Department and Family and Consumer Science Department degree programs for training and classroom opportunities. They charge $700 per year, but they have large discounts that they provide to people for different reasons. If there's more than one child from a family, they'll get a discount, things like that. But they have $700,000 a year in losses for the last 3 years. And that's very problematic because it's a real drain on the university's resources. The Missouri Academy, again, probably a great idea, a dual-year enrollment high school associate degree program for approximately 200 students. And they could charge up to $2.8 million in tuition, but there's a lot of discounts that are given. In some cases, people were allowed to come in for free. A large number of people were allowed to come in for free. And maybe there's a reason to allow people to do this for free. But again, there was millions of dollars spent on this that appears to be a big loss for the university. So we asked for, is there any sort of a cost-benefit analysis of these programs? Is there any way to get these programs into profitability or at least to break even? And we were not able to find anything. In fact, the accounting system can't even report operating results for various programs or individuals. And it's difficult to determine on a daily basis or monthly basis whether these programs are gaining or losing money. It required really an outside auditor to come in and determine that so much money was being lost. So our recommendation here is to analyze the programs to determine if they should continue to operate them, or if they really do want to operate them, how they can be more efficient and not have such continuous and really, for a university that size, very large losses that are impacting other students and their ability to get their education. And the board's response was that they will continue to review the process, try to get better accounting programs in, and get a better analysis of whether these are worthwhile programs and how they can be more profitable, which is all we can ask. So again, possible ways to save millions of dollars to the university if these programs are implemented more efficiently. We had some issues with real estate acquisitions. The foundation bought 2 pieces of property which the university leases, but there's no apparent plan for their use, and no appraisals were obtained to determine if they were purchased at fair market value. Both of them were around $500,000. And we expect when there's real estate that's that expensive, we would expect to have appraisals, and we would expect to make sure these are arm's length transactions. And the board said they will put in a process in place to ensure that real estate transactions are properly appraised and properly documented. We had some issues with the university-owned airplane. Airplanes seem to be a big issue around the state now, whether they're efficient. I think the days where people can fly around everywhere are kind of over, and you have to really look at cost-benefit analysis and the use of an airplane. We were unable to find a cost-benefit analysis to determine if the university should continue to own and use an airplane. Northwest Missouri State University does not require people to look at alternative travel methods. I know in the private sector where I came from, if you're going to use a corporate airplane, you have to prove that it would be cheaper to use the corporate airplane than to actually fly commercial. There's no requirement at the university, and that's a pretty sound accounting practice that's used in the private sector and more in the public sector that we would expect people to use in these tight budget times. There are reasons why you might need an airplane. We're not saying you can't ever have an airplane, but it shouldn't just be a luxury. It should be a necessity. It should be something that you can show is efficient and a proper use of university resources. And they are going to make, the university board did say they would do a cost-benefit analysis, and they'll try to determine whether it's efficient or not efficient to keep the airplane, and if the airplane is kept, that it will be used when it provides a cost-benefit to the university. We had, I won't bore you with all the details, but we had some problems with the cash receipting process, the way receipts are issued and monitored at the university. Receipts need to be numbered when income comes in and you give a receipt to somebody. It's very important that everything be carefully documented and monitored. You can read more about that in the audit, but this is a very common finding in our audits where receipting and disbursement processes either don't have adequate oversight or adequate documentation, and we found a little bit of both at the university, even including like sports tickets and things like that, where there was a potential for abuse of the sporting tickets, which I know is a big deal at the university. We want to make sure that everybody deserves a ticket, gets a ticket. There's no fraud involved in that, and we didn't find evidence of fraud, but what we did find was that there was not enough oversight to prevent it. So we hope that people will fix that problem as well. And the board agreed with the recommendations and said they plan to implement them. We had some issues with capital assets. Universities have a lot of assets, and it's very important to keep track of them and know what you really have and what you don't, because, for example, you could be paying insurance on assets that you've gotten rid of, and that costs a lot of money for no reason. And in this case, we found that capital asset records were not accurate or up to date. We saw one list of 1,600 computer-related items purchased before the year 2000, and everybody knows what a computer was like in the year 2000. It's very unlikely they're still being used, but there was a record that showed they were still there and being used, and it's probable that they were disposed of a long time ago. In fact, we found the university had not conducted a complete physical inventory for over 15 years, and it's a painful process to conduct physical inventories, but it's a necessary process, and all universities do it, and it should be done more frequently than 15 years. We also found that the university does not have a policy requiring departments to notify the accounting department when capital assets are moved or disposed of. So you're not going to be able to track them unless you know when they're moved. And people do move furniture, computers, vehicles, they move them around, and it's important that the accounting department know where they are so that when inventories are conducted, that they're full, accurate, and complete. I'll give you an example. We found that there were 36 items that were sold at a surplus auction in January of 2010. They're gone, but they were still listed as capital assets in the possession of the university several months later. And this can be a problem for the university. And this was just a sample. We expect there was probably a lot more. So again, we asked the university to review its capital asset and record process, conduct physical inventories, and establish policies and procedures for how capital assets can be moved around the university and how they'll be reported when they are. And that's a long-term program. It'll take a while to get something like that in place. The university has agreed to do it. They're saying it takes 4 to 5 years. We think that probably ought to move a little quicker than that, but we understand it does take some time. So we're hoping that they'll be able to do it quicker than 4 or 5 years from now. We found some issues with computer security. There needs to be a disaster recovery plan and procedures to make sure that the right people get computer access. This is a very common finding also. And we also looked at the spending of the stimulus money, which appeared to be mostly for the purpose of maintaining existing employees. We're always worried when stimulus money is used just to sort of extend service for employees, and then when that money runs out, what happens to the employees? So we would ask that the university take a good hard look at that as well. That's a pretty quick summary of what we found in the audit. Obviously, there's a lot more in it, and we hope you'll take the time to review it. And I thought it was a very thorough job done by our team. Our biggest concern was these large services contracts that had these provisions where money had to be given to the stadium fund and other places. We feel the university did not get good value out of that, and of course, it's also seems very clearly a violation of Missouri procurement rules. And we hope that those will be fixed. That's all I have for my initial presentation. I'm very pleased that you took the time to join me here. And what I will do is I'll put on my earpiece now and be prepared to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you, sir. Now we'll open up the phone lines for questions. We'll let Auditor Schweich get his Larry King-style earpiece in and get ready to go live to Utah. We do want to remind folks, if you're watching live on the video conference call, please turn down your computer speakers to avoid any feedback whenever you ask questions. Also, if you're not answering or asking any questions, we would ask that you mute your phones right now as well. And please mute your phones if you're not asking any questions. Also, let me ask you to state your name and your media outlet before you ask a question. And we'll go ahead and open up the phones for our first question. Anybody with questions, you can go ahead and fire those off. Now we'll open up the phone lines for questions. We'll let do we have any questions on the phone?
I do have one.
Okay.
This is Kirk from KXCV Radio.
Okay, Kirk, we're going to turn you down just a little bit here. You're loud in our earpieces. But Kirk, go ahead.
Okay, well, regarding compensation for past performance and the funds going between the university and foundation, aside from your recommendations or the board's agreement to implement policy changes, I'm wondering about moving forward. Will there be some sort of repayment to the state from the funds in question, or repayment from the foundation back to the university? Any requirements along these lines?
Generally, it's a good question. Generally, we do not require those types of payments as long as we believe people were acting in good faith. We don't believe there was any intentional misconduct here. If there were to be any sort of a law enforcement action, that would probably come from the Attorney General's office, and I doubt that would happen.
All righty. Thanks,
Thank
Kirk.
you.
Anybody else with questions this afternoon? All right. We want to thank everybody for joining us on our web stream as well, and of course for calling in to the media. This video will be available again on our YouTube channel at auditor.mo.gov. And quickly, I know we wanted to thank everybody at Northwest Missouri State University, and I know we tried to get there, but because of a scheduling conflict, we couldn't make it out today.
Yeah, I hope to be in Maryville sometime soon. I really appreciate your willingness to accommodate this form of an audit delivery, but we'll be happy to answer any further questions you have. Just get in touch with Gary, and we can continue this dialogue after this web conference ends. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. You can find this video live on our website in the coming days at auditor.mo.gov. From Jefferson City, I'm Gary McElye. Thank you for joining us.